Everything you've been working for is making you miserable, and you don't even realize it. You wake up, you go to work, you chase the promotion, you earn the money, you buy the things, you check the boxes, and somehow, despite doing everything right, you feel empty inside. There's a reason for that, and it has nothing to do with working harder or achieving more. In fact, the more you achieve on the outside, the worse you might feel on the inside. Because while you've been building your external life, something else has been happening, something you haven't been paying attention to. Your inner garden has been dying. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how to bring it back to life. In today's episode, The Inner Garden. Subscribe now. Activate notifications. Have you ever stopped, really stopped, to think about what's going on inside of you? Not your physical body, not your bank account balance, not your job title or your social status, or any of the external markers that the world uses to measure a person's worth. But what's happening deep down in your heart and mind? What's growing in that secret place where nobody else can see? You know, there's a profound truth that most people never discover until it's almost too late. And I mean that literally. Some people don't figure this out until they're on their deathbed, looking back on 70 or 80 years of life and realizing they spent all that time chasing things that ultimately didn't matter. They spend decades, entire lifetimes, chasing after the things they can see with their eyes and touch with their hands. The promotions, the raises, the bigger houses, the nicer cars, the impressive titles, the recognition from colleagues and neighbors and people whose opinions really shouldn't matter, but somehow do. And health and relationships and peace of mind. They earn more money than they ever dreamed possible. They buy bigger houses than they need. They collect awards and credentials and accolades. They fill their calendars until there's no room to breathe, no space for rest, no time for the things that actually matter. Inside, this quiet voice that whispers in the middle of the night, in those dark hours when you can't sleep and the facade drops and you're left alone with yourself. And that voice asks the question you've been avoiding. Is this all there is? Is this what I worked so hard for? Is this really what life is supposed to be? Now let me tell you the truth that could change everything if you'll really hear it and take it to heart. Your external world is never going to fix your internal world. Never. And I don't mean probably won't, or it's unlikely, or it might not work for everyone. Fame and status and comfort. And you could still feel absolutely miserable on the inside. Empty, anxious, restless, dissatisfied. Lonely even when you're surrounded by people. Invisible, intangible, incredibly important space where your thoughts live and your emotions grow and your beliefs take root. Got a constant cultivation, softened. Purpose that gives meaning to every day. You achieve. Gardens were never designed to be the main garden. They were never meant to be the source of your peace, your joy, your purpose, your fulfillment, your sense of who you are. Those things can only grow in one place. Your inner garden. The garden of your heart and mind. The garden that nobody else can see, but that determines everything about how you experience life. While we reflect on this, write in the comments which city and country you're watching, listening to this daily message of light from. We would love to know how far our message is reaching. Think about a real garden for a moment. Not an abstract concept or a pretty metaphor, but an actual physical, tangible garden. I want you to picture it in your mind with as much detail as you possibly can. Close your eyes if you need to. Maybe it's a vegetable garden with neat, orderly rows of tomatoes and lettuce and carrots and beans. Maybe it's a flower garden bursting with colors and fragrances, roses and lilies and sunflowers reaching toward the sky. Maybe it's a combination of both. A cottage garden where vegetables and flowers grow side by side in beautiful, productive harmony. Maybe it's a small container garden on a balcony. Maybe it's a sprawling plot of land in the countryside. Purpose? Because this garden, this tangible, earthy, living thing that you're picturing in your mind, is about to teach you the most important lesson you'll ever learn about your inner life. Can you ignore a piece of land completely? Never water it, never tend it, never pay any attention to it whatsoever, and then be surprised when nothing good grows? Of course not. That would be ridiculous. Everyone knows that a beautiful garden, a productive garden, a thriving garden is always the result of intentional, consistent care, space, and transform it into something beautiful and life-giving. Season nobody applauds. Like trying to dig through concrete. Your shovel bounces off, your fork won't penetrate, your hands blister, your back aches, and you're sweating and frustrated and wondering if it's even worth it. Compost and nutrients and organic matter that will make it fertile again. Material that will feed the soil, so the soil can feed the plants. The evidence yet? Just trust that this invisible, unglamorous work is laying the foundation for something beautiful. Years-old hurts, old resentments, old beliefs that aren't serving you anymore, old patterns that need to be broken. Quit before you even start. Will thrive in every soil. Not every plant belongs in every garden. You have to understand your climate, your conditions, your resources, your limitations, your unique situation. The best, you have to be intentional. You have to understand what will work in your particular garden. Forget this basic principle. And then we wonder why our lives are producing chaos instead of peace. Consistent with the seed, thriving garden from a dying one. This is where most people fail with their physical gardens, and it's absolutely where most people fail with their inner gardens. Because the truth is, planting good seeds isn't enough. You have to water them consistently, regularly, faithfully. Nutrients. The cells are starting to lose turgor pressure. The plant is beginning to stress, and if you still don't water it, eventually you'll start to see the effects. The leaves droop, the color fades, the growth slows, and if you continue to neglect it, the plant withers, it struggles, it suffers, it dies, it suffers. Carry out photosynthesis, the process that literally creates energy from sunlight. They need it to maintain their structure, to grow, to produce flowers and fruit. Water is life for a plant. True and life-giving. It means reading things that inspire you and challenge you to grow, instead of consuming content that makes you anxious or angry or envious. It means listening to messages that encourage you and build you up instead of voices that tear you down and make you feel small. It means surrounding yourself with people who speak life over you instead of people who drain you with constant negativity and drama. It means spending time in prayer or meditation or contemplation, connecting with God and remembering who you really are and whose you are. Garden needs. You also have to pull the weeds. And this, my friend, this is where the real work happens. This is where most gardens fail. This is where most inner gardens become completely overrun and produce nothing but pain. Tomorrow there are more. You pull weeds this week and next week there are more. You pull weeds this month and next month there are more. You can never just pull weeds once and be done with it. It's a continuous, ongoing, relentless process that requires vigilance and commitment. and the willingness to do unglamorous work that nobody else sees or appreciates. Threat to any garden, physical or spiritual, because weeds don't need any help to grow. Think about that for a moment. You don't have to water a weed. You don't have to fertilize it. You don't have to give it special attention or create perfect conditions for it. You don't have to talk nicely to it or pray over it or nurture it in any way. Weeds grow all by themselves, aggressively, relentlessly, opportunistically. Tending to your herbs, the weeds are growing in the background. Taking advantage of every moment of inattention, they're spreading their roots. They're sending out runners. They're going to seed and creating thousands of new weeds. They're establishing themselves so deeply that pulling them becomes harder and harder the longer you wait. Advantage of any opening, any neglect, any moment when you're not paying attention. You leave a garden untended for just 1 week, and the weeds start to move in. You leave it untended for a month, and the weeds have established themselves. You leave it untended for a season, and the weeds have completely taken over, choking out everything good until all you're left with is a tangled mess of thorns and thistles and invasive plants that produce nothing of value. Weeds, if you just let them be because you're too busy or too tired or too distracted to deal with them, here's what happens. They spread, they multiply exponentially. One dandelion goes to seed and creates hundreds more dandelions. One creeping vine sends out runners that establish new plants every few feet. One thistle scatters thousands of seeds that lie dormant in the soil, waiting for their chance to sprout. Before you know it, what started as a few weeds here and there has become a complete infestation, supposed to be there in the first place. Home to your inner garden, because the weeds I'm talking about aren't just plants in the ground, they're thoughts, beliefs, emotions, patterns, and they work exactly the same way as physical weeds. The ability to be present in the moment. The age of social media. You scroll through your feed and see everyone else's highlight reel, and that weed sends out runners everywhere. You're not successful enough. You're not attractive enough. You're not doing enough. Your kids aren't achieving enough. Your house isn't nice enough. Your vacation wasn't exotic enough. And before you know it, you can't enjoy anything because you're constantly measuring yourself against standards that were never meant for you, particularly insidious one. It plants itself deep, often in childhood, and it grows these massive root systems that are incredibly difficult to remove. It tells you that you're fundamentally flawed, that you're not good enough, that you'll never be good enough, that you don't deserve love or acceptance or grace. And if you don't pull this weed, it affects everything. Every relationship, every opportunity, every decision, because you're always operating from a place of, I'm not enough. Weed of resentment. It's like a vine that wraps itself around everything in your garden. You hold on to hurt from the past. You refuse to forgive. You keep rehearsing what was done to you, and that resentment spreads everywhere. It affects how you see people, how you interpret their actions, how you respond to their words. It colors everything with suspicion and cynicism and the expectation that people will hurt you again. You have. It grows easily in a culture that's constantly telling you that you need more to be happy, more money, more possessions, more experiences, more achievements, and it robs you of contentment and gratitude and the ability to enjoy what you already have. Constantly acting superior, it prevents real connection because you can't be vulnerable when you're trying to maintain an image of having it all together. People walking around today are living with inner gardens that have been completely overrun by these weeds, and they don't even realize it. They've gotten so used to the weeds that they think that's just how life is. They've normalized anxiety, they've accepted bitterness as justified, they've embraced fear as inevitable, they've rationalized resentment as reasonable, they've justified comparison as motivating, they've internalized shame as deserved, they've excused emptiness as the price of success. The external life, on achieving and acquiring and impressing and performing, that they completely forgot to tend to what matters most. They forgot that their inner world, their thought life, their emotional health, their spiritual condition, their beliefs about themselves and God and others and life, these things are the foundation of everything else, moment, every challenging situation. Because you can only experience life through the lens of your inner world. If your inner garden is full of weeds, everything you look at is going to be colored by those weeds. The anxiety will make everything seem threatening. The bitterness will make everyone seem suspect. The comparison will make every achievement seem insufficient. The shame will make every interaction feel like judgment. A neglected garden doesn't stay neutral. It doesn't just freeze in place and wait patiently for you to come back and start caring again. That's not how living systems work. A neglected garden gets worse. Significantly, measurably, inevitably worse. Over your garden. They send out underground runners that pop up in places you thought were clean. They establish root systems so extensive that pulling them becomes a major undertaking. Stealing, they become stressed, vulnerable, susceptible to disease and pests, and eventually they weaken so much that they die. And once a good plant dies in a neglected garden, it's gone. It doesn't come back on its own. You have to start over. Plant a new seed, wait for it to grow. Plants, it forms a crust. Nutrients get depleted as the weeds pull them out for their own growth. The beneficial organisms in the soil, the earthworms and microbes and fungi that create healthy soil, they start to disappear because the environment is no longer hospitable to them. The soil becomes less and less capable of supporting the good things you want to grow. Problems when they first appear. Restoration is relatively straightforward. You pull the few weeds before they develop deep roots. You water the slightly stressed plants before they're too far gone. You amend the soil before it becomes completely depleted. A few hours of work, maybe a day or two, and you're back on track. Easier, the problems compound exponentially. The weeds get bigger and their roots go deeper, sometimes several feet deep, and pulling them becomes a major physical challenge. Some of them break off at the surface, leaving roots behind that will just sprout again. The good plants get weaker, and some die completely, and you have to start those from scratch. The soil becomes so hard and depleted that you need significant intervention, lots of compost and amendments and time just to get back to a neutral starting point. The weed of hopelessness, trying to convince you that change is impossible so you won't even attempt it. Because the truth, the liberating, hope-filled, life-changing truth, is that no matter how neglected your inner garden has become, it can be restored. It can be brought back to life. There is no garden so overgrown that it's beyond hope. There is no heart so weedy that it can't be cleared. There is no life so off track that it can't be redirected. Restoration is hard work. It's going to require you to do something you might not be used to doing. It's going to require you to slow down when everything in your culture is telling you to speed up. It's going to require you to pay attention when you've been living on autopilot for years. It's going to require you to get your hands dirty, when you've been trying to keep everything clean and comfortable and under control. It's going to require you to start doing the hard, uncomfortable, unglamorous work of pulling weeds and planting new seeds. Your father who was never there for you emotionally. The shame from mistakes you made 20 years ago that you've never forgiven yourself for. The fear of failure that's kept you playing small your entire life. The bitterness toward that friend who betrayed you and never apologized. The comparison to your sibling who seems to have everything you don't. The pride that won't let you admit when you're wrong or ask for help. The greed that keeps you chasing more when you already have enough. The anxiety about the future that steals your peace in the present. To everything else, you can't heal what you won't acknowledge. You can't change what you refuse to confront. You can't pull weeds you won't admit are there. Denial doesn't make the weeds go away. It just gives them more time to grow, to spread, to establish themselves so deeply that removal becomes more difficult. Be growing. Not what you think should be growing. Not what you pretend is growing when you're presenting yourself to other people on social media or at church or at work. But what's actually there. The reality. The good, the bad, and the ugly. The fruit and the weeds. The health and the disease. The truth. Hope that comes from seeing reality clearly and knowing that reality can be changed. Because once you see the weeds for what they are, once you stop pretending they're not there, or making excuses for them, or blaming other people for them, you can start pulling them. Light makes way for something better to grow. They deserve it. But because you deserve to be free, you create space for peace, for the ability to move forward without being chained to the past, for emotional energy that was being consumed by bitterness to be redirected toward things that actually matter, instead of constantly worrying about moments that haven't happened yet and might never happen. Pulling those weeds, once you start challenging the negative thoughts and confronting the toxic beliefs, and releasing the painful emotions you've been carrying like heavy stones in your pockets, something miraculous begins to happen. Something you might not have felt in years, maybe decades. Light gets in. Hope breaks through. You start to feel, maybe for the first time in a very long time, like change is actually possible, like you're not stuck, like you're not doomed to repeat the same patterns forever, like you might actually be able to become the person you were created to be, instead of the anxious, bitter, empty version of yourself you've been living as. Fruit that will nourish you and sustain you and overflow to bless everyone around you. That kind of peace doesn't happen by accident. It's a seed that has to be intentionally planted and consistently watered, that can coexist with grief and challenge and difficulty, because it's not dependent on circumstances. It's rooted in something deeper. Anything in return that sees the image of God in every person, even the difficult ones. That love is a seed that has to be planted and nurtured and protected, and imperfect and on their own journey. Patience with God's timing, which rarely matches our preferred timeline. Patience is a seed that grows slowly, which is ironic, but also perfect. When someone is struggling and does something about it, that speaks words of encouragement instead of criticism, that assumes the best instead of the worst, that gives people the benefit of the doubt. Well, where truth has been planted deep and has taken root in your character. Be strong without being aggressive, to be confident without being arrogant, to speak truth without being cruel. Gentleness is a rare and beautiful fruit in a world that often confuses it with weakness. Later, self-control is freedom, not restriction. It's the freedom to become who you want to be instead of being enslaved to whatever you feel like doing in the moment. Faith, trust in God even when you can't see the path forward. Belief that He is good even when life is hard. Confidence that He has a plan even when everything feels chaotic. Faith is the opposite of control. It's surrender. It's letting go. It's admitting you don't have all the answers, but you know the one who does. They can with what they have. Grace is what makes relationships possible. It's what allows us to stay connected even when we disappoint each other. Reason that your life matters, that you have unique gifts and experiences and perspectives that the world needs, that you're not just taking up space or killing time until you die. You have a calling, a mission, something you were specifically created to do that no one else can do quite the way you can, that are good and true and life-giving, instead of toxic and false and soul-destroying. You read books that inspire you instead of content that depresses you. You listen to messages that build you up instead of voices that tear you down. You spend time with people who encourage you instead of people who drain you with constant negativity. Instead of cynicism, with love instead of hatred. You protect your heart, your mind, your inner garden from the constant stream of garbage that the world wants to pour into you 24 hours a day through every device and screen and platform, draining. On commitments that pull you away from what really matters. On activities that look impressive but leave you feeling empty. Past all of it is planting seeds and watering seeds, and you get to choose which seeds you water. Faithful tending, you'll start to see changes, small at first, maybe barely noticeable, but real. The anxiety that used to wake you up at 3 in the morning doesn't show up as often. The bitterness toward that person who hurt you starts to soften just a little. The comparison to others doesn't sting quite as much. The shame that used to crush you begins to lift. The fear that used to paralyze you starts to lose its grip. Love and patience and kindness, they develop roots. They push through the soil. They produce leaves. They start to mature. And before you know it, maybe 6 months in, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, depending on how neglected your garden was when you started, you're seeing fruit. Real, tangible, undeniable fruit. Kind of fruit that doesn't just make you feel better temporarily, it makes you better permanently. It changes who you are at the deepest level. It transforms your character, your perspective, your responses, your relationships, your entire experience of being alive. What happens to you? It's determined by what you cultivate within you. The thoughts you allow to take root, the beliefs you water, the emotions you nurture, the patterns you reinforce. These are the seeds that produce the harvest of your life. Genetics or your upbringing or your bank account or other people's opinions or the economy or the political situation or any of the 1,000 external factors that people use as excuses for why they can't change. Control which ones you water. You can decide what you're going to give your attention to, what you're going to dwell on, what you're going to believe, what you're going to nurture and protect and cultivate. Your habits, which shape your character, which shapes your destiny, are experienced through the lens of your inner garden. If your inner garden is full of weeds, you won't be able to enjoy any of your external success. The anxiety will steal your peace. The comparison will make every achievement feel insufficient. The bitterness will poison every relationship. The shame will convince you that you don't deserve good things. The fear will keep you from fully living. Peace and joy and purpose even when your external circumstances are difficult, even when you don't have everything you want, even when life is hard. because your peace isn't coming from your circumstances. It's coming from within, from a garden you've tended faithfully, from seeds you've planted and watered and protected. Create the kind of inner life that produces the outer life you've been longing for. And we're going to learn this through the story of a man named Miguel, whose journey from emptiness to abundance, from despair to hope, from a garden overrun with weeds to a garden producing beautiful fruit, will show you exactly what's possible when you make the decision to tend what matters most. It's a difficult situation, isn't it? Put in the comments your opinion. What would you do in Miguel's place in this moment of emptiness and despair? And you won't believe it, but something unexpected was about to happen. Now let me introduce you to someone whose story will help you understand this garden principle in a way that's impossible to forget, in a way that will stay with you long after this message ends, in a way that might just change everything about how you see your own life. His name was Miguel, and if you had met him 10 years ago, you would have thought he had it all figured out. You really would have. You would have looked at his life and thought, that's the kind of success I'm working toward. That's what it looks like when you do everything right. Life has mattered, that you've made something of yourself, that you haven't wasted the one life you've been given, and contribute to industry publications. The kind of success that means when you walk into a room of professionals, people recognize you and want to talk to you and value your opinion. Addresses, public spaces that won awards for their contribution to the urban environment. Mixed-use developments that revitalized struggling neighborhoods. Each one a testament to his skill, his creativity, his technical expertise, his attention to detail, his ability to take abstract ideas and turn them into concrete reality that improved people's lives. How did he convince them to take those risks? How did he manage the complexity? How did he navigate the politics? How did he keep projects on budget and on schedule? How did he build a reputation like that? They wanted to know his secrets, wanted to learn from him, wanted to follow in his footsteps. Mattered. His approval meant something. His endorsement could make a project. His criticism could send designers back to the drawing board. The financial rewards matched his professional reputation. Miguel made good money, more than good actually, significantly more. He could afford a comfortable home in a desirable neighborhood, one of those tree-lined streets where the houses are well maintained and the lawns are green and the schools are good. Not a mansion, he wasn't that kind of wealthy, but a nice house, a really nice house, the kind with enough space for everything he needed and plenty of things he didn't strictly need, but enjoyed having. A home office with built-in bookshelves and good lighting for late-night work, a modern kitchen with quality appliances, a backyard where he could have grilled on weekends if he'd ever had time for that kind of thing. Calculator running in the background, adding up expenses, wondering if he could afford it, feeling guilty about spending money. Kind of car that started every time and didn't leave him stranded and didn't require constant repairs. Upgrade his technology when it became outdated instead of nursing along devices that were 3 generations behind. Up with nothing. Who had watched his parents struggle and stress and argue about money, who had gone without so many things he wanted as a child. This financial stability felt like a massive achievement. He had every reason to be proud. He had started with nothing, absolutely nothing. No advantages, no connections, no family money, no network of successful relatives who could make introductions or open doors or give him a head start. Nothing. People, hard-working people, loving people. But they didn't have resources. They didn't have college degrees. They didn't have careers. They had jobs. And there's a difference. Would be embarrassed to list on a resume. But Miguel wasn't embarrassed. He was determined. Home shower, try to get a few hours of sleep and start the whole cycle again, working towards something better. Like he was constantly operating in a fog of exhaustion, but pushing through anyway because what choice did he have? If he wanted to get his degree, if he wanted to change his trajectory, if he wanted a different life than his parents had, he had to work. There was no other way. Choice? He had to pay for school, had to pay for books, had to pay for rent and food and bus fare, had to work. Come meet her parents over spring break. He was working double shifts to save money. Eventually she got tired of being low priority, found someone with more time, and Miguel couldn't even be angry about it because he understood. He just didn't have anything to give. Enjoyable and filled with memories, reduced to a blur of exhaustion and determination and singular focus. Around him, he took the jobs other young architects didn't want, the difficult clients, the impossible deadlines, the projects with tiny budgets and huge expectations. And he delivered, every time. He built a reputation as someone who could be counted on, someone who didn't make excuses, someone who got results. Would have been easier and more comfortable to say no. He took on the difficult projects that others avoided, the ones with complicated stakeholders and political landmines and technical challenges, and he made them work. He found solutions. He navigated the politics. He managed the complexity. Positions. Got invited to speak at conferences. Got his work published in industry magazines. Got everything he had been working toward. You can build the life you want. You can achieve your goals. The person he'd always wanted to be. The person who made something of himself. The person who didn't let circumstances define him. The person who beat the odds. Not even himself most of the time. On the inside, behind the carefully constructed facade of success and competence and having it all together, Miguel was falling apart. Completely, utterly, devastatingly falling apart. And he had been for years. Happiness and fulfillment. Miguel had never felt more empty in his entire life. There was this void inside of him, this gaping, aching, terrifying void that nothing seemed to fill. Not his work, no matter how many projects he completed or awards he won. Not his achievements, no matter how impressive they looked on paper. Not his possessions, no matter how nice or expensive or comfortable. Not his reputation, no matter how many people knew his name or respected his opinion. Nothing filled it before. Every moment of recognition or praise or validation vanished into the darkness and did nothing to fill the space. Would be racing. His mind would be spinning, and he would lie there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, asking himself questions he couldn't answer. Would changing even help? Or is this just who I am now? The questions would loop endlessly in his mind, the same questions night after night, never getting closer to answers, just spiraling and spiraling until the alarm went off and it was time to get up and put on the mask again and pretend everything was fine. The way he analyzed architectural problems, breaking it down into components, looking for the structural issue, the design flaw, the thing that needed to be fixed. But this wasn't a building. This was his soul, and it didn't respond to logic or analysis or systematic problem solving. Feel like enough from the inside. It didn't satisfy him, it didn't fulfill him, it didn't bring him the peace and joy and sense of purpose he'd always assumed would come once he achieved his goals. It just felt hollow, empty, like he was living someone else's life, like he was playing a role in a play he hadn't auditioned for, and didn't want to be in but couldn't figure out how to leave. It pushed through it, work harder. That had worked for everything else in his life. When school was hard, he worked harder. When money was tight, he worked more hours. When projects were challenging, he put in more effort. Work had always been his solution to every problem, his escape from every discomfort, his answer to every question. Sometimes, right? This was nothing unusual, nothing to worry about, just part of being successful, just the price you pay for achievement, just temporary pressure that would ease up once he finished this current project, won this current bid, met this current deadline. Just needed a vacation, a real vacation, not the working vacations where he checked email constantly and took calls and never fully unplugged. Just some rest and he'd feel better. Once he had time to recharge, this feeling would go away. Maybe this was that, a temporary period of questioning and dissatisfaction that would pass if he just waited it out. If he just kept going, if he just stayed busy enough and didn't think about it too much. It had to fade, because there was no reason for him to feel this way. He had everything. Everything that was supposed to make a person happy. So clearly, this was just a glitch, a passing mood, a temporary malfunction that would correct itself. Been his solution. Work had always been his escape, his distraction, his source of identity and purpose and meaning and validation. When things got difficult, he worked. When he felt sad, he worked. When he felt anxious, he worked. When he felt empty, he worked. It was the one thing he knew how to do, the one thing he was good at, the one thing that had never let him down, the one thing that had gotten him from poverty to success, already full, even though he was already stretched thin, even though he barely had time to sleep. He said yes to new clients, new opportunities, new challenges, because maybe this next project would be the one. Maybe this next achievement would finally fill the void. Maybe this next success would bring the satisfaction he was searching for. Night, filling every hour, every minute, every moment with work. Because as long as he was working, as long as his mind was occupied with problems to solve and decisions to make and tasks to complete, he didn't have to think, didn't have to feel, didn't have to confront the emptiness, couldn't control. During meetings, during meals, during the rare moments when he tried to relax, always checking, always responding, always available, always working. Because what if he missed something important? What if someone needed him? What if there was an urgent problem? But really the checking was just another way to avoid being alone with himself. Meetings, speaking engagements, consultation calls, every moment scheduled, every hour accounted for. Never any space, never any quiet, never any stillness where the emptiness might catch up with him. What if success doesn't actually lead to fulfillment? What if I've wasted decades of my life working toward goals that don't actually matter? What if there's something fundamentally wrong with the way I've been living? What if I can't fix this by working harder? Thinking meant admitting that something was fundamentally wrong with the life he'd spent decades building. That maybe, possibly, terrifyingly, he had made a terrible mistake in how he'd prioritized his life. That maybe the single-minded focus on career success that had gotten him here had also cost him something essential, something he couldn't name, but desperately missed, something money couldn't buy back. That couldn't be ready for that. Because if he admitted that, if he faced that truth, then what? What was he supposed to do? Quit his career? Give up everything he'd worked for? Start over at 55? That was ridiculous, impossible, terrifying. So he kept himself busy, constantly busy, relentlessly busy, frantically busy, too busy to stop and look at what was actually happening inside of him. Grew. It was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much he poured in, more projects, more achievements, more recognition, more money, it kept draining out, leaving him just as empty as before, only more exhausted, more frustrated, more desperate. Professionally grew thin, dangerously thin. He snapped at people over small things, things that didn't actually matter, things that wouldn't have bothered him before. Couldn't seem to stop himself, couldn't access the kindness or grace or patience he knew he should be showing. He couldn't seem to control it. The irritation just exploded out of him. He was pushing away the very people who still cared about him. Encourage. When junior architects presented their work, instead of mentoring them the way senior people had mentored him, he pointed out every flaw, every mistake, every way it fell short of perfection. He didn't build people up. He tore them down. And he could see them becoming afraid of him, hesitant to share ideas, walking on eggshells around him. And part of him hated that he was becoming this person. But another part of him couldn't seem to stop. His commute, the noise in the office, the incompetence of contractors, the demands of clients, the bureaucracy of city planning departments, the politics of the profession. Things that were just normal parts of work and life, things that had always been there, suddenly felt unbearable. Every small frustration felt magnified. Every minor inconvenience felt like a catastrophe. Himself avoiding interaction, eating lunch alone at his desk instead of joining colleagues, declining invitations to after-work gatherings, making excuses to skip social events, isolating himself more and more because being around people required energy he didn't have and forced him to maintain a facade he was tired of maintaining. Going wrong. And intellectually, Miguel knew this was a distorted perspective, that there was good in the world too, that things weren't really as bleak as they felt. But he couldn't seem to access that balanced view anymore, couldn't seem to see past the darkness that had settled over everything. Up never gave him a break, never offered grace or compassion or understanding. Setback became evidence that he wasn't good enough. Every project that didn't go perfectly became confirmation that he was losing his edge, getting old, becoming irrelevant. The voice never stopped, never paused, never softened, just constant criticism, constant judgment, constant condemnation, an endless loop of self-flagellation that made every day harder, every task heavier, every interaction more draining. Say it or recognize it as the distorted, harmful, destructive weed that it was. He just believed it, internalized it, let it shape how he saw himself and his life and his worth. Love reading, fiction that transported him to other worlds, biographies that inspired him with stories of people who overcame obstacles, architecture books that expanded his vision and challenged his thinking. He had shelves full of books he'd been meaning to read, but now when he tried to read, he couldn't focus, couldn't concentrate. The words blurred together. His mind wandered. He'd read the same page 3 times and not retain anything. So he stopped trying. Trails near his home, places he used to go on weekends to clear his head and connect with nature, and move his body and breathe fresh air. But now the thought of hiking just felt exhausting, like one more thing to do, one more task on an endless to-do list, one more obligation. So he stopped going. The guitar sat in the corner now, gathering dust, unplayed for months, years maybe. Because what was the point? Who had time? Who had energy? It all felt like a waste of time that could be better spent on work or sleep, or just staring blankly at the television, too numb to engage with anything that required effort or emotional investment. Achievement that brought no satisfaction. Busy. Too much work. Maybe next time, big deadline coming up. Crazy week. Let me check my calendar and get back to you. And he never got back to them. Never followed up. Never made it happen. Because he didn't have the energy. Didn't have the emotional capacity. Didn't have anything to offer. What would they even talk about? His work. That's all he had. That's all his life was. And talking about work with people who weren't in the industry just made him feel more isolated, more different, more disconnected. Just makes you feel disconnected from the entire human race, even when you're surrounded by people. Was going through the motions, but he wasn't present, wasn't engaged, wasn't alive in any meaningful sense. Made everything even harder to bear was the guilt, the crushing, suffocating, relentless guilt he felt about feeling this way. Because logically, rationally, intellectually, Miguel knew he had no right to be unhappy, no right to feel empty, no right to be dissatisfied. He had everything, everything that people said would make him happy, everything that people spent their whole lives working toward but never achieved. Millions of people would give anything for a nice home in a safe neighborhood, a reliable car, quality possessions, recognition in his field, respect from his peers, the ability to afford good food, good coffee, quality clothes, small luxuries. He wasn't struggling, wasn't suffering, wasn't facing real hardship like so many people in the world were. Why couldn't he just appreciate what he had, instead of constantly feeling like something was missing? Why couldn't he just be satisfied with a life that so many other people would consider a dream come true? The guilt added another layer to the emptiness, another weed growing in his already overgrown inner garden. Now he wasn't just empty, he was empty and ashamed of being empty. Empty and guilty for being empty. Empty and convinced that there was something fundamentally broken about him, something defective and wrong and ungrateful, for feeling this way when he had so much, had real problems, real struggles, real reasons to be unhappy. People facing poverty, illness, loss, discrimination, violence, genuine hardship. And here he was, with every advantage, with every comfort, with every marker of success, feeling miserable. What kind of person did that make him? What kind of spoiled, entitled, ungrateful person couldn't just appreciate what they had? The guilt became another voice in his head, joining the chorus of criticism and judgment and condemnation. You have no right to feel this way. You should be grateful. You should be happy. Look at what you have. Look at what others don't have. You're being selfish. You're being weak. You're being ridiculous. Just snap out of it. Just choose to be happy. Just focus on the positives. Just be grateful. Tried. He really tried. He would make mental lists of things he should be grateful for. His health, his career, his home, his financial stability, all the things that were good in his life, all the things that were going right, all the reasons he should feel blessed instead of empty. And he would feel guilty that the gratitude lists didn't work, that knowing intellectually that he should be grateful didn't translate into actually feeling grateful, that trying to force happiness just made him feel more broken, died, choked by weeds he didn't know how to pull. Been at the office since 7 in the morning, dealing with a difficult client, reviewing plans that needed to be submitted by end of week, managing a team that was behind schedule on a major project. The usual chaos, the usual pressure, the usual feeling of drowning in obligations and never quite being able to get ahead. Thousands, all of them filled with people rushing somewhere, stressed about something, living their own version of the same exhausting life. He turned on the radio, not really listening, just needing some noise to fill the silence, to occupy some small part of his mind so he didn't have to think. Depressing. Miguel sat there, hands on the wheel, mind already at the office working on the next problem even though he'd just left, and he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. Garden 1,000 times, maybe more than 1,000. It was part of his daily commute, so familiar that he'd stopped seeing it years ago. It had become invisible, just part of the background scenery that his eyes registered, but his mind didn't process. Like the billboards and the strip malls and the chain restaurants, just there, unremarkable, unnoticed. Been moving. The traffic light turned green, but Miguel barely noticed, creeping forward in the slow line of cars, but his attention was completely captured by what he was seeing. Divided into maybe 20 or 30 individual plots. Some were neat and organized with straight rows and mulched paths, others were more chaotic, a cottage garden style with vegetables and flowers growing together in seemingly random but somehow pleasing arrangements. Noise and hurry and stress, this garden was alive, truly, vibrantly, undeniably alive, that were just starting to fade, promising fruit to come. From the sun, work pants with dirt stains on the knees, boots that had clearly seen years of use. On his head was a wide-brimmed straw hat, the kind gardeners wear to keep the sun off their face and neck. Attention, such gentle focus that it was almost meditative, almost physical, a longing so intense it almost hurt. This stranger, this old man in dirty clothes kneeling in a community garden, had something Miguel desperately wanted. Something he'd been searching for in all the wrong places for decades. Something he couldn't name but recognized the instant he saw it. Reputation. Wasn't calculating his net worth, wasn't comparing himself to anyone, wasn't performing for anyone, wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just there, fully, completely, peacefully there, tending his garden, living his life, being present to the moment. Miguel had completely missed, had tapped into something real while Miguel had been chasing shadows. With him, the garden, the old man. The sense of peace and purpose that seemed to radiate from that simple plot of land. It haunted him in a way nothing had in years, broke through the numbness he'd been living in, penetrated the thick walls he'd built around his heart, created a crack in his defenses that let in the smallest sliver of light. What had he figured out that Miguel, with all his education and intelligence and achievement, had missed? That night, Miguel couldn't sleep, which wasn't unusual. He had plenty of sleepless nights, but this was different. Instead of lying there anxious about work, instead of the usual spiral of worry and criticism and emptiness, his mind kept returning to the garden, to the old man, to the peace he'd seen in that brief glimpse. Was just a garden, just an old man tending to some plants. Nothing profound, nothing life-changing, just a random scene that his tired, stressed mind had latched onto for some reason. He should forget about it, move on, focus on the things that actually mattered: his work, his career, his responsibilities. Tonight, when he was trying to sleep, during his commute, during meals, the garden, the old man, the peace. He didn't have an answer, but he couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop wondering about it, couldn't stop feeling that pull, that sense that something important was there, something he needed to understand, something that might have answers to questions he'd been asking for years. Character, something he never would have done in his normal, controlled, carefully planned life, something that made no logical sense and served no professional purpose and couldn't be justified by any rational argument. Weekends, he got in his car and drove back to that community garden. Understand what it was. Saturday morning than it had on that Tuesday evening. More people were there, maybe a dozen, scattered across the various plots, all engaged in their own gardening tasks. Some were weeding, some were planting, some were harvesting. All of them looked peaceful, content, present. He didn't garden, didn't know anything about plants, didn't have time for this kind of hobby. He had work to do. He should go home. This was a waste of time. Evening, wearing similar clothes, working among the plants with that same gentle focus, that same peaceful presence. Instead of looking annoyed or suspicious or confused by this stranger standing outside the garden staring at him, he smiled. A warm, genuine, welcoming smile that seemed to light up his entire weathered face. A smile that somehow said, "I've been expecting you," even though that was impossible because they'd never met, and the man had no idea who Miguel was. "Garden?" Miguel nodded, not trusting himself to speak, his throat suddenly tight with emotion he didn't understand. Kind. The eyes of someone who had found peace, who had figured something out, who lived from a place of deep contentment. If strangers showed up all the time because they couldn't stop thinking about his garden, that happens sometimes, he said quietly, with a knowing smile. Sometimes a garden calls to people. Come, let me show you around. Exactly where he needed to be. As Samuel led Miguel through the garden that Saturday morning, something unexpected began to happen. Something Miguel hadn't experienced in years, maybe decades. His defenses started to lower. You know how we all build these walls around ourselves? These protective barriers, these carefully constructed facades, these layers of protection that keep people from seeing who we really are, underneath all the accomplishments and the titles and the carefully curated image we present to the world. Miguel had built walls so high and so thick that even he had forgotten what was behind them. He'd been performing the role of successful architect for so long that he'd almost forgotten there was a real person underneath the performance. The walls had become his identity. The facade had become his reality. The mask had become so comfortable, so familiar, that he barely remembered what his real face looked like. Performing, safe enough to just be, grasp. Through the bed of fresh herbs that filled the air with their fragrance, basil and rosemary and thyme and mint, a symphony of scents that somehow made Miguel breathe more deeply. Much or their fruit would split. How lettuce preferred cooler temperatures and would bolt in the heat. How beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, actually improving it for the next crop. How companion planting could reduce pests naturally without chemicals, had been struggling with. It was subtle. Samuel never explicitly made the connections, never said, "This is like your life," or "This applies to you." Seeds, smaller than the nail on your pinky finger. Look at them now. Receives the care it needs to grow. How'd before he could stop it? What if it's been neglected for too long? What if it's too hard, too compacted, too depleted? Can anything still grow there? Samuel turned to look at him, and Miguel felt like the old man could see right through him, not in an uncomfortable, invasive way, in a compassionate way, like a doctor examining a patient, trying to understand the nature of their pain so he could help them heal. There was no judgment in Samuel's eyes, no criticism, no disappointment, just deep, genuine compassion, understanding, recognition of suffering, and a desire to help. Said gently, his voice carrying a weight of meaning that went far beyond the literal words. It doesn't matter how hard it's become, or how many weeds have taken root, or how depleted the nutrients are. With patience and effort, any soil can be restored. I've seen gardens brought back from conditions that looked hopeless. Soil so hard you could barely get a shovel into it. Soil so full of weeds you couldn't see the earth. Soil so depleted that nothing would grow, and with time and care and the right amendments, those gardens came back to life, produced abundant harvests, became beautiful again. Always possible, always. No garden is beyond hope. No soil is beyond restoration. Felt pointless, all this work for such a small return. Whether he ever wondered if it was worth it. Whole life chasing impressive things. Comfortable life. By every external measure, I was successful. Was my job title. I was my responsibilities. I was what I contributed to the company. And when that was gone, when I retired and suddenly wasn't that person anymore, I felt lost, empty. Like I had spent my whole life building something that ultimately didn't matter, made a terrible mistake in how he'd prioritize things, that he'd get to the end and realize he'd wasted his one precious life on things that didn't actually matter. Trips with anything that would distract me from what I was feeling. Played a lot of golf, watched a lot of television, took up fishing, joined clubs, stayed busy, kept moving, but nothing worked. The emptiness just grew. It was like trying to fill a bottomless pit. No matter what I poured in, it was never enough. Here, where we're sitting now, it was full of trash, weeds, broken glass, old tires, debris. It was ugly. Depressing, dangerous, the kind of place people walked past without even looking at, because why would you want to see that? And for some reason, I stopped. And I stood there looking at this disaster of a lot, and I thought, what if someone cleaned this up? What if someone turned this into something beautiful? What if this place that's bringing ugliness and neglect to the neighborhood became something that brought life and beauty instead? Samuel turned to look at Miguel directly. And then I realized that someone could be me, that I had time now, that I had energy, that I had hands that could work, that I could be the one to do this. So I decided to try. Gardening. I had never grown anything in my life except maybe a houseplant that usually died within a few months. I didn't know the difference between annual and perennial, didn't know what soil pH meant, didn't know how to start seeds or when to plant or how to deal with pests. I knew absolutely nothing, but I felt this pull, this sense that this was what I was supposed to do, that this was where I was supposed to start. Energy of remembering transformation. I got permission from the city to use this lot, recruited a few volunteers, and we cleared the trash. Bags and bags and bags of trash, old furniture, broken electronics. Who knows what all was here? It took weeks just to get it cleared, and then we pulled the weeds and brought in good soil. Amended what was here with compost and nutrients, built these raised beds, put up this fence, and I planted seeds, my first seeds ever. I was 58 years old, and I was planting seeds for the first time in my life, more intimate. And as I worked in this garden, something else started to grow too. Something inside of me. I started to feel alive again. I started to feel purpose again. Not because I was building something impressive or earning recognition or making money or any of the things I thought mattered, but because I was creating life. I was taking something broken and making it whole. I was contributing something real and good and beautiful to the world, and in the process, I was being made whole. 2. He couldn't remember. He had taught himself years ago that crying was weakness, that emotions were obstacles to success, that feelings were distractions to be managed and controlled and suppressed, that the only thing that mattered was staying strong and pushing forward, and never letting anyone see you vulnerable. Broken inside him, Miguel felt the walls beginning to crack. Enough. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't fill the emptiness. And I don't know what to do about it. I don't even know what's wrong. I just know that something is fundamentally broken, and I don't know how to fix it. Deepest fear and pain to a stranger. What was he doing? Why had he said that? This man didn't know him, didn't care about his problems, probably thought he was ridiculous, a privileged, successful person, complaining about being unhappy when he had everything. Who had been there? Someone who wasn't going to judge or fix or dismiss, just someone who was willing to sit with him in his pain. Are the external gardens, and they're important. They have value. They matter. I'm not dismissing them or saying they're wrong or suggesting you wasted your time, but they're not where you live. Heart then gestured toward Miguel's chest. You live in your inner garden, the garden of your heart and mind and soul. And from what you're telling me, you've been neglecting that garden for a very long time. Amount of success, no amount of money, no amount of recognition, no amount of achievement, no amount of anything out there will ever fill the emptiness inside if you're not tending to your inner garden. Because that's where real life happens. That's where peace grows. That's where joy takes root. That's where meaning blooms. That's where purpose flourishes. Everything else, all those external things you've been focusing on, they're just decoration. They're just the frame around the picture. But the picture itself, the actual life you're living, that's determined by the state of your inner garden. You stop paying attention for even a few days. Weeds never stop trying to establish themselves. They're always there, always waiting for an opportunity, always ready to take over if you let them. Grow and spread and choke out everything good. And if you don't pull them, if you just ignore them because you're too busy with other things, they take over. They multiply, they spread, and before you know it, your entire inner landscape is overgrown with toxic growth that's producing nothing but pain. Start. I've been ignoring my inner life for so long, focusing only on work, only on achievement, only on the next goal. I don't know how to do what you're talking about. I don't even know what tending my inner garden would look like. Mine because you're ready to learn, and I'm going to teach you. Not just how to tend a physical garden, though we'll do that too, but how to tend the garden that matters most, the one inside of you. Fingers through the soil, testing its texture and moisture. Most people have no idea what's actually growing inside them. They're not paying attention. They're on autopilot. Their minds are like runaway trains, thoughts racing everywhere, and they're just passengers along for the ride, not even aware of where they're going. Attention, not judging them yet, not trying to fix them, not analyzing them or arguing with them, just noticing them, becoming aware of what you're actually thinking throughout the day. Yourself, what was I thinking right before I felt this? Because emotions don't just appear out of nowhere. They're not random. They're the fruit of your thoughts. They're the harvest of the seeds you've been planting and watering in your mind. Onto the bench and inviting Miguel to join him again. Let's say you're driving to work tomorrow morning and you suddenly feel anxious. Your chest tightens, your breathing gets shallow, your mind starts racing. Most people would just accept this as normal. I'm stressed, I'm anxious, that's just how I feel, that's just life, that's just how. We're imagining it going badly. You were anticipating criticism, you were predicting failure. Those thoughts, those seeds you planted in your mind, they produced the anxiety you're feeling. Influence what you think about what happens to you. You can choose which thoughts you're going to believe and dwell on, and water. You can choose which thoughts you're going to challenge and question and pull out like weeds. Patterns. Notice what thoughts show up repeatedly. Notice what you tell yourself when things go wrong. Notice how you talk to yourself when you make a mistake. Notice what you believe about yourself and your worth and your future. Believed. Weeds he had identified. And somehow, seeing this evidence that Samuel had walked this path before him, that he wasn't alone in struggling with negative thoughts and toxic beliefs, made Miguel feel less broken, less alone, around with an inner garden full of weeds, anxiety, fear, shame, bitterness, comparison, self-doubt. These are universal human struggles. The difference between people who thrive and people who merely survive is whether they're tending to these weeds or letting them grow unchecked. That held them to their stakes. After you become aware of your thoughts, after you start to see the patterns and recognize the weeds, then comes the hard work. The work of actually pulling those weeds, of challenging the lies, of confronting the toxic beliefs, of removing the thoughts that are poisoning your inner garden. Now the voice of someone who had fought this battle and won. Every time a negative thought arises, every time that critical voice in your head starts telling you you're not good enough, or you're a failure, or you're wasting your life, or whatever lie it's trying to plant, you challenge it. You ask questions, you examine it the way you would examine a structure's foundation before building on it. Ask yourself, is this thought actually true or does it just feel true? What evidence do I have for this thought? Am I applying an impossible standard? Am I catastrophizing? Am I mind reading? Am I fortune telling? Would I say this to a friend who came to me with this problem? Is there another way to look at this situation? What would be a more truthful, more balanced way to think about this? For instance, Samuel continued, let's say you make a mistake on a project at work, and immediately that voice in your head says, "You're such a failure. You always mess things up. You're going to lose this client. You're going to lose your reputation. Everyone's going to know you're a fraud." Strengthening. You ask, is it actually true that I'm a failure? What's the evidence? Well, I made one mistake on one project. Does that define my entire career? Does that erase the hundreds of successful projects I've completed? Am I applying a standard to myself that I would never apply to anyone else? Would I call someone else a total failure if they made one mistake? Of course not. So why am I applying that standard to myself? Samuel reached down and picked up a handful of soil, letting it run through his fingers, dark and rich and alive. And then you replace the weed with a seed, a good seed, a true seed. Instead of, "I'm a failure," You plant, I'm human and I make mistakes sometimes, and that's okay. I can learn from this. I can do better next time. One mistake doesn't define me or erase all the good work I've done. You believe it. You let it sink deep into your heart until it becomes truth. For a while, watching the garden, watching other gardeners work their plots, watching bees move from flower to flower, watching life happen in this simple space that had become sacred. And Miguel felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt hope. Real, genuine, tangible hope. Not the fake hope of denial or positive thinking, but the solid hope that comes from meeting someone who has walked the path you need to walk and made it to the other side. Vulnerability in his voice that he wouldn't have allowed himself to show to anyone else in his life. Will you teach me how to do this? How to tend my inner garden? Samuel turned to him with that warm smile, that look of compassion and understanding and welcome. That's why you're here, he said simply. Come back next Saturday. Bring gloves. We have work to do. Just physical strength. He felt like he was being offered something he'd been searching for his entire life without knowing it. Not success, not achievement, not recognition, but a path, a way forward. A hope that change was actually possible, discovering who he really was beneath all the layers he had built up over the years. A journey toward tending the garden that mattered most. The following Saturday morning arrived, and Miguel woke up earlier than he had in months. Not because his alarm went off, not because he had to get up for some obligation or deadline, but because he wanted to, because he was actually looking forward to something. And that feeling, that simple sensation of anticipation, of genuine excitement about the day ahead, was so foreign to him that it took him a moment to identify what it was. Anything. When was the last time he had looked forward to his day? When was the last time he had woken up with energy and purpose instead of dread and exhaustion? He couldn't remember. His life had become such a monotonous cycle of obligation and stress that the very concept of looking forward to something had become a distant memory from a younger, more hopeful version of himself. Suits and professional attire, even on weekends. He found an old pair of work gloves in his garage, relics from some home repair project years ago, and grabbed a water bottle. The small notebook Samuel had given him was on his nightstand, where he'd kept it all week, already filled with pages of observations that had both shocked and enlightened him. Scrolling through emails on his phone. The coffee was rich and aromatic. The toast was perfectly crispy. Small pleasures he'd been missing for years because he was always too distracted, too rushed, too focused on the next thing to be present for the current thing. He was about to embark on something important, something that could actually change his life, instead of just adding more achievement to a resume that already impressed no one more than it impressed him, which was to say, not much at all anymore. With the sun, with the seasons, with the natural rhythms of life instead of the artificial timelines of business, surprised by how natural it felt. Ready as I'll ever be. Kind of space that most people would look at and think, this is hopeless, too far gone, not worth the effort. Years. The person who used to tend it moved away and nobody else took it over. The weeds moved in, the soil hardened, the good plants died. It looks hopeless, doesn't it? Miguel nodded, unable to see how this mess could ever become anything beautiful or productive. No matter how neglected it's become, it can always be restored. Always, it's never too late, it's never hopeless. It just takes work. Patient, consistent, faithful work. But it's absolutely possible. In your heart and mind. Established. Harder to remove next time. You have to go deep. You have to be thorough. It's not fun. It's not quick. But it's necessary. Work was monotonous, repetitive, seemingly endless. Removed. Samuel continued, sitting back on his heels and gesturing to the plot. This plot was once beautiful. Someone cared for it. Someone planted good seeds here and watered them and tended them. And for a while, it produced good things. Flowers, vegetables, beauty, nourishment. But then life happened. The person who was caring for it had to leave. And slowly, gradually, neglect set in. They took over. They spread. They choked out the good plants. They made the soil hard. And before long, what was once beautiful became a mess. Not because anyone intentionally destroyed it, but because it was neglected. In a garden. Maybe it's because we get busy. Maybe it's because we get hurt and we decide it's easier to just ignore what we're feeling than to deal with it. Maybe it's because nobody ever taught us how important it is to care for what's happening inside of us. Maybe it's because our culture tells us that what matters is achievement and success and external things, not internal health. Attention. We stop pulling the weeds, we stop planting good seeds. And the garden that should be producing peace and joy and purpose starts producing anxiety and bitterness and emptiness instead. Garden, Samuel said simply. One weed at a time, one handful of dirt at a time, one seed at a time. There's no shortcut, Miguel. There's no magic formula. There's no quick fix. Restoration is slow work. It's patient work. It's unglamorous work. But it's the only work that actually produces lasting change. Start to see things he'd been avoiding. Something. If I'm not moving forward, if I'm not getting recognition, I feel worthless, like I don't matter, like my life has no value. My worth is completely tied to my performance. Examined it before tossing it aside. Because when your worth is tied to your achievements, you can never rest. You can never be satisfied. There's always another goal, another milestone, another level to reach. And even when you reach it, it doesn't fill the emptiness because achievements were never designed to give you worth. You already have worth. You had it the moment you were born. You have it simply because you exist. The question is whether you believe that. Land deep. I don't think I do believe that, he admitted. I think I've spent my whole life trying to earn something I can't earn. One he removed from the soil seemed to represent something being removed from his inner garden. Beliefs that had been poisoning him, thoughts that had been strangling joy, patterns that had been producing emptiness, exposed. There was nowhere to hide it, no camouflage of green growth to make it look less devastated than it was. Sandwiches Samuel had brought, and Miguel found himself talking more openly than he had in years, maybe ever. He told Samuel about his career, about the pressure he felt, about the constant anxiety that he wasn't doing enough, achieving enough, being enough. He told him about the relationships he had neglected, the friendships he had let die because he was too busy or too tired or too self-absorbed to maintain them. Buried, the parts of himself he had locked away because they didn't fit the image of success he was trying to project. He told him about the voice in his head that was relentlessly critical, constantly pointing out his flaws and failures and shortcomings. Felt in decades, is the natural consequence of neglecting your inner garden. You're experiencing the harvest of the seeds you've been watering for years. And right now, those seeds are producing anxiety, emptiness, and dissatisfaction. The fruit is bitter because the seeds were toxic. But Miguel, here's the good news, the hope-filled, life-changing good news. You can change what you're watering. You can start pulling these weeds. You can start planting new seeds. And if you do, if you commit to tending your In a garden, the same way you've committed to building your career, you will see a harvest. A different kind of harvest, the kind that actually satisfies. Before I start to feel different, Samuel smiled. That knowing smile of someone who had been asked this question before, who had asked it himself once. That depends on you, on how committed you are, on how consistent you are, on how willing you are to do the work even when you can't see progress yet. But I'll tell you this, if you do the work, if you show up every day and pull the weeds and plant the good seeds and water them faithfully, you'll start seeing fruit faster than you think. Maybe not in weeks, but in months, yes, definitely. And the fruit will keep growing, keep multiplying, keep getting sweeter. Because that's how gardens work. They start slow. But once they get going, once the roots go deep and the plants establish themselves, they produce abundance. Time every day and went home. And in the evenings, instead of working or collapsing in front of the television in numb exhaustion, he did the practice Samuel had given him. Was critical, fearful, or self-defeating. You used to be young and energetic and full of potential. Now look at you. Matter of time before everyone figures it out. You're losing your edge. You're not as creative as you used to be. You're becoming irrelevant. Had become the background noise of his existence, the lens through which he viewed everything, the filter that colored every experience. Constantly, without even realizing it, greeting him with that warm smile that never failed to make Miguel feel welcome and valued, aware. And awareness is always the first step toward change. One of them is a lie, a distortion, a seed that was planted by fear or shame or comparison, and you've been watering it for so long that it's grown into this massive, tangled mess that's choking the life out of you. Said quietly. Measured by what criteria? Miguel thought about it, really thought about it, maybe for the first time, I guess. Weed. And it needs to be pulled. Am I catastrophizing, imagining the worst possible outcome as if it's inevitable? Am I mind-reading, assuming I know what other people are thinking? Am I fortune-telling, predicting the future as if I can see it? Would I say this to a friend? Is there another way to look at this situation? What would be a more truthful, more balanced way to think about this? And then, Samuel explained, after challenging the weed, Miguel needed to replace it with a seed, a good seed, a true seed. But this time they weren't just pulling weeds, they were beginning to prepare the soil for planting. Samuel showed Miguel how to break up the hard, compacted earth, how to amend it with compost and nutrients, how to make it receptive to seeds. That power. You don't have to believe every thought that pops into your head. You can choose. You can decide what you're going to water and what you're going to pull. Felt different too. Not completely transformed, not healed, not fixed, but different. There was a crack in the darkness, a sliver of light getting in, a small but real sense that maybe, just maybe, change was actually possible. With a teaspoon. But he kept at it. Haven't clients continued to hire me? What evidence do I actually have that nobody respects me? You're wasting your life. Is any life that's still being lived truly wasted? Or is there always opportunity for growth and change? And slowly, gradually, something began to shift. The thoughts didn't stop coming, but they started to lose their power, started to feel less like absolute truth and more like the weeds they were. And Miguel started to experience something he hadn't felt in years. Space. Mental and emotional space. Room to breathe. Room to choose. Room to plant something better. The weeks that followed marked the beginning of a transformation that Miguel never could have imagined. He started showing up at the garden every Saturday morning, just like he had promised Samuel. But something strange and wonderful happened. Saturday mornings weren't enough. He found himself thinking about the garden during the week, wondering how the seeds he had planted were doing, eager to pull the new weeds that he knew would be sprouting, curious about what Samuel would teach him. Next, being hard and compacted was becoming soft and rich. The weeds that had choked everything were being replaced by neat rows of vegetables and flowers. Young tomato plants were establishing themselves. Lettuce was sprouting. Beans were climbing their trellises. Marigolds were beginning to bloom. Achievement or success or any external accomplishment. Planting practice, Samuel had given Miguel specific assignments. Every evening before bed, write down 3 things he was grateful for. Not generic things, not the same things every night, but specific moments from that day, specific experiences, specific blessings. Push through. A good cup of coffee that morning. The way sunlight came through his office window at a certain angle. A colleague who said thank you for his help on a project. A smooth commute home. Small things, ordinary things, things he would have overlooked completely just weeks ago, that had always been there but that he'd been blind to. The practice was literally rewiring his neural pathways, training his mind to see differently. Become part of your self-perception instantly. But over weeks and months of faithful tending, Miguel started to see fruit. Carrying toward people who had hurt him or disappointed him started to soften. Not because those people had changed or apologized or made things right, but because Miguel was learning to release what he couldn't control, to forgive not for their sake, but for his own. Because holding on to bitterness, as Samuel had said, was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. First, not happiness exactly. It was deeper than that, more substantial, more solid. It was peace, real, genuine, bone-deep peace. The kind that doesn't depend on circumstances, the kind that remains steady even when life is chaotic, and with that peace came joy. Not the fleeting surface-level pleasure that comes from external things, but deep, abiding joy, the kind that bubbles up from within, the kind that comes from living aligned with who you truly are. 2. He had been so focused on his career for so long that he had let almost all of his friendships atrophy. But as he started to heal, as he started to become more present and more authentic, he found himself reconnecting with people. His sister, whom he hadn't really talked to in years beyond obligatory holiday calls. An old friend from college who had reached out several times but whom Miguel had always been too busy to meet. Colleagues he had kept at arm's length, real conversations, being vulnerable, asking for help when he needed it, offering help when he could, showing up as his true self instead of the polished, perfect facade he'd been maintaining. And to his surprise, people responded. They opened up to him. They trusted him. They drew closer instead of pulling away, because authenticity invites authenticity. Vulnerability creates connection. Miguel's plot with his arms crossed and a huge smile on his weathered face. Miguel walked over and stood beside him, looking at what had once been a tangled mess of weeds and hard soil, and dark and soft. Everything growing, everything thriving, everything producing, happened inside. The inner garden that had been just as neglected, just as overgrown, just as seemingly hopeless. And now, after months of patient, faithful work, it too was producing fruit. Achievements can't earn. There's something you need to understand about gardens. something profound that Samuel taught Miguel, and something that applies to every person listening to this message. Gardens don't lie. They can't pretend. They can't fake results. You can't stand in front of a barren plot and convince yourself it's producing fruit when it's not. You can't look at a field of weeds and call it a harvest. A garden tells the absolute truth about what's been planted and what's been watered. It reveals, with brutal honesty, the quality of care it's been receiving. Relaxed. What changed? His assistant remarked that he didn't snap at her anymore, that he seemed patient and kind instead of irritable and demanding. Clients commented that meetings with him felt collaborative instead of tense. Everyone could see something had shifted, though they couldn't always identify what. Worry had been so familiar, he'd stopped recognizing it as abnormal. But as he tended his inner garden, that anxiety began to diminish. The baseline shifted. He could breathe deeply without his chest feeling tight. He could sleep without waking at 3 a.m. in a panic. When stressful situations arose, and they still did, instead of spiraling, he could step back, breathe, and respond with clarity. Miguel started noticing beauty again. Sunlight through leaves, birds singing, the taste of good food, genuine laughter. Colors seemed brighter, sounds clearer. Life felt vivid again instead of muted and gray. He felt alive in a way he hadn't in decades. It's sunlight and then you wait. You trust the process. This patience transformed how he approached everything, no longer expecting instant results, no longer getting frustrated when things took time, learning to take the long view regularly, actually listened instead of waiting for his turn to talk, started building real friendships instead of just professional connections. Into self-condemnation, he'd pause and think, I'm human, I can learn from this, one mistake doesn't define me. Services pro bono to non-profits, showing up not just to take, but to give. These stories show us that it's possible to transform your inner garden as long as you're willing to do the patient, consistent work. Isn't that right? Stop for a moment and subscribe to the channel to start tending your inner garden, and activate notifications to receive an alert whenever a new daily message of light is published on this channel. After Miguel had been working in the garden for nearly 2 years, he asked Samuel a question that had been forming in his mind. Samuel, there are so many people out there who are where I was 2 years ago, empty, lost, desperate for change but not knowing where to start. If you could give them just 3 steps, 3 practical things they could do today to start tending their inner garden, what would they be? Samuel smiled. That's a good question, because transformation can feel overwhelming when you're just starting. You look at how far you have to go and you don't know where to begin. So yes, let me give you 3 steps, 3 simple, practical, powerful steps that anyone can take right now, today, to start tending their inner garden, growing everywhere, and they're not paying attention. So the first step is simply to start noticing what you're thinking. Happens to you, but you can influence what you think about what happens. So step 1, become aware. Notice your thoughts, write them down, see the patterns, identify the weeds. You constantly think, I'm not good enough. What would be a more truthful way to think about this? And then you replace that weed with a seed, a true seed. Instead of, I'm not good enough, you plant, I am enough. I have value. I am worthy of love and respect just as I am. Inspire you. Listen to messages that encourage you. Surround yourself with people who speak life over you before allowing anything else in. And now I ask you, Did you like the 3 practical steps from this daily message of light? If yes, like this video to increase its reach so you help bless more people with this daily message of light. Miguel's journey had taught him profound truths about transformation, patience, and tending what matters most. Samuel had been a faithful guide, but as Miguel's understanding deepened, he began to realize something breathtaking. This garden metaphor, this truth about inner transformation, it all pointed to someone greater, someone who was not just a teacher of the way, but the way itself. Gardener, the one who understood the human heart better than anyone who had ever lived. Jesus didn't just teach people how to tend their gardens. He entered the garden. He knelt in the dirt. He touched broken plants with tender hands and brought them back to life. Have grown into massive beliefs, strangling everything good. And instead of condemning people for the state of their gardens, Jesus stepped in. He started pulling weeds. He started planting truth. He started transforming lives from the inside out. Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." The hard soil and planted seeds of hope. We can't transform ourselves completely. We can try, we can work hard. We can pull some weeds and plant some seeds. But at the deepest level, we need help. We need someone who can reach the places we can't reach, who can heal the wounds we can't heal, who can break the patterns we can't break on our own, the weeds you can't pull, to plant the seeds you don't even know you need, to water them with living water that never runs dry, to bring forth fruit you never thought possible. You're trying harder. But because you're connected to the source of all life and all growth and all transformation, no matter how neglected it's become, minutes talking to Jesus like you would talk to a gardener you've just hired. Tell him about your garden. Tell him about the weeds you're struggling with, the fear, the anxiety, the bitterness, the shame. Be honest. Be real. He already knows, but he wants to hear it from you. Gospels.Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, pick any chapter. And as you read, look for how Jesus was tending someone's inner garden. You'll see it everywhere, and let that story plant a seed of truth in your own heart. Christ illuminate your inner garden. May his hands pull the weeds that have been choking your life. May his truth plant seeds that grow into peace, joy, love, and purpose. May you experience the transformation that only the master gardener can bring. God bless you. If today's reflection helped you understand how to tend your inner garden, I'm sure you'll enjoy this other video I've selected, especially for you here on the screen. Click now to continue growing your inner garden. So here we are. You've walked with Miguel through his entire journey, from emptiness to abundance, from despair to hope, from a garden overrun with weeds to a garden producing beautiful fruit. You've seen transformation is possible. Garden, Arven. Has it been neglected for so long that you've forgotten what a healthy garden even looks like? Here's what I need you to understand. Your inner garden will never tend itself. Never. It requires intentional, consistent care. And every day that you neglect it, every day that you tell yourself you'll deal with it later, the weeds grow stronger, the soil gets harder, the good plants die, and the emptiness deepens. Moment. Not an easy path, but it leads somewhere beautiful, somewhere true, somewhere you actually want to go. Will you